that you will say something because it needs to be said.
My heart was popping right out of my chest.
You have to face it, and be bold.
I suppose if you're at your lowest ebb or your weakest ebb and you step up, you do feel powerful.
Like people go, you're brave. Like actually took like an incredible amount of strength.
And you step up.
Body does take an absolute pounding. Sometimes it isn't bravery actually, it's having no choice.
Fear is it's not real, it's just in my head.
I said, just pretend you're the queen. Hello.
Kicking myself for not being strong enough.
I can do this and I will do it.
But you do, you adapt.
Got to be positive.
I can do this and I will do it. Something good always comes out of every difficult situation.
I'm still struggling here and there, but it's nothing that I can't deal with now.
I can do this and I will do it.
Hi, Charmaine. Thank you so much for joining us. This month in Secret Handstand Club, my online handstand community, we're exploring the circus as our theme. And so I'm really excited to bring on my favorite circus people to talk to me and share some stuff about their training and performing. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So you're a circus strong lady and you've been traveling and performing for 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
How did you end up on that path?
Well, it kind of all, one thing leads to another and you end up somewhere you didn't expect. But when I was a teenager, I was really into theatre, and I was part of a youth theatre group that had a circus artist came like to my small country town to do some workshops with this youth theatre group. Mm-hmm. And in that workshop, she taught me how to be a bass, which is the person in circus who lifts the other people. And it turned out to be something that I was quite natural at. Like in the space of a weekend, I got quite far with being able to learn new things. And I was a very overweight kid, and I'd never kind of thought of myself as someone who could be adept at a physical thing. I'd always been like, I knew I liked acting, and I was, on the debating team, and I read lots of books, and I did, but physical stuff had always been not my bag. And then to discover this way that I actually could enjoy my physicality and that I was naturally good at it was like the first time I'd ever been good at a physical thing. And then, of course, I was 15 and that workshop finished and she left and there was no avenue to keep going with it. But then when I moved, I went to university to study theatre and teaching. And when I got there, I moved to a bigger city and I found circus workshops. So I started going once a week to these circus workshops that were mostly about acrobalance, which is the lifting each other. Mm-hmm. And so for the 4 years that I studied, I was going, most of the time I was going once a week to these classes. And there was the great thing, it was frustrating at the time, but the great thing was that I didn't just find an acrobatic partner and just work with them and push into like really high. I didn't have the teachers around or the partner around to really push into high skill. Mm-hmm. But I was working with lots of different people all the time. And the thing that is great about that is that it actually gave me a really solid base to work from, where the basics got so in my bones and I could work with people I hadn't ever worked with before and find the stability in that. And so it gave me, I think, a bulletproofness physically that if I had just propelled straight into high skill things, I wouldn't have had. But just I really kept at the basics for so long. And then once I finished uni, rather than going into teaching, I decided to enter into circus, but I didn't think I had the physicality to be a professional circus artist. So I had intended to go into it as more of a producer and a stage manager. So I started out by being the production coordinator for a circus festival, and there I met lots of people, and then I started being the tour manager for a circus, and there I kept training with different people. And one of the people that I trained with at the circus that I was tour managing, her and I would get up at 6 so that before the day started we could get some training in together, and we made a little act that then we made into a street show that then we performed somewhere and in Australia, and the guy who programs Circus Theatre Field at Glastonbury was there, and he asked us if we would come to Glastonbury with our show. And then because we were going to go to Glastonbury, we also thought, well, we'll go to Edinburgh and we'll do street shows in Edinburgh. And that was in 2002. And then from that, we kind of got an idea of this outdoor arts scene in Europe and around the UK that was so rich and so abundant. And so then we started touring together around Europe. Every summer we would come back and tour UK and Europe, and then we would go back and work in Australia and Asia through the other season. And that was a comedy acro show. We were both in pink bikinis with a blow-up pool, pretending to be stunt water skiers. But after that, about 5 years of that, I wanted to make a solo show, and I couldn't figure out. Again, I kind of hit this thing of going, I don't have the right physicality. I don't have enough tricks. All I know how to do is lift people. And then I realized that if I just shifted the framing and was like, well, I'm strong. I'm like, the thing that I do have is that I know I'm strong. And so I kind of delved into vaudeville strong lady research and decided to become kind of like a timeless, kind of very influenced by vaudeville, but not playing a vaudevillian strong lady. Just kind of bringing this present day strong lady to life. And I have a friend who is obsessed with old sideshow, and so he was amazing and really helped me find some strong lady stunts that are really traditional ones, or strong, traditional strong man stunts really, but pull them forward. And then I kind of invented some of my own and made a show that was really about lifting men out of the audience. And I invented a finale that was a metal bar across my shoulders with 2 swings on it, and then I get 2 guys out of the audience, lift them in a few different ways, and then get them both to sit into the swings and then kind of squat them and do a little spin around. So I call it a human carousel. And then that show still exists, and I've been doing it touring it internationally since 2007. But over the years then, because I really love partner acrobatics, I've then also worked with ensembles or made different duo shows. There's a guy called Ruben ... who has toured loads in Canada, so you may have encountered him. But he's a handstand artist who also does Chinese pole, and we made a duo together, which was a hand-to-hand and perch pole. So I would have a metal harness on my shoulders with a metal pole attached to it, and he would do Chinese pole tricks on the pole while I hold it, or do handstands on me in different places, basically. And that was heaps of fun. I've done a couple of other duo shows along the road as well, but then COVID hit, and I've got my solo show completely relies on touching people I don't know a lot, and so that show was on the shelf until further notice. But was really lucky that in the couple of years leading up to COVID, I'd really started thinking a lot more about the breadth of what strength is beyond just lifting heavy things and showing off. And I'd started to really think about the fact that as a strong lady, I present this invincible front of like, here is this impossible thing and I can do it. And and realizing that also underneath that, I constantly had this doubt of like, oh, I'm not quite strong enough, or I'm a bit of an imposter, or it's a or like I'd try and go outside of my wheelhouse and encounter other like, for example, handstands, and be like, I'm just not strong enough. And I was like, if I, as a circus strong lady who is officially strong, don't feel strong enough, what's that about? You know, it's like, and so I started to really I did a whole lot of research into like philosophy and psychology and neuroscience, all about like what is resilience, what is strength, what is inner strength, all of that stuff, which went down a rabbit hole leading me to become a yoga teacher as well. And and then, but then I also started interviewing loads of people to kind of find what are the universal threads about strength, and interviewing people about a time when they were strong. And all of that research before COVID hit was already in development to become a new show, an outdoor show called Strong Enough and an indoor show called Power, that use a lot of the same physicality and stories, but are separate shows. And when COVID hit, I was a month out from premiering the theatre show, and the outdoor show was going to be the next bit I was working on. So through this whole time, I finished creating Power and had the chance to do it at three venues between lockdowns.
Right.
And then through the lockdown that took us from January till pretty much now, I've made the outdoor show, and on the weekend I just got to premiere it. And so those two new shows really pushed me to become physically stronger, because I was pushing into a whole lot of skills that are outside of my comfort zone, including there's a handstand act in that show that is basically all about how you never feel strong enough, because no matter how far you get, there's always the next trick that is just out of reach. And that kind of idea of strength not as a finish line but as a process, and it's kind of a circus and storytelling show, using the strength in circus tricks to show the inner strength of the people whose stories I'm telling. So that was a very long answer. Sorry, I just...
No, it's such an incredible journey and story. And there's so many different paths and different things that I want to delve deeper into. But before we do, I just want to say I was in Edinburgh in 2002. I lived in Edinburgh back then, and I'm like, I could have seen you. Could have seen you back then. And the other thing that kind of really stood out was just, back in your early training, you talked about building this really strong foundation. And that's something we talk about all the time with like handstands, is like, there is all this foundation work that you need before you can, do the tricks. And like, how important was that to, you then being able to progress to where you are?
So important, because also like there's a bunch of people who can do a selection of very high skill level partner acrobatics tricks. Mm-hmm. But then if you put them in a situation where they're trying to lift an untrained body, they're completely out of their depth, and they can get injured. And also I feel like I've had so few injuries in my career, and I'm 42 and still able to perform a really physical show because those foundations are there. And so it allowed me to be able to do things where I'm lifting volunteers, or where I can work with, like, I tend to work with male flyers who are heavier than some of the female flyers, but because I'm not trying to do the kind of things where I'm just going to rely on muscling through something, everything's about technique. I can work with heavier flyers, and I can work with untrained bodies in a way that's still safe for my body. Like, that was one of the things that one of the women on the weekend who saw my show, afterwards she came and she was like, how can you be your age and still doing a really physical show like that? Because isn't there like a use by date for circus artists? And it really comes down to like those foundational things and making sure that you're like really solid where you are before you move forward, which
Yeah.
can be ego wise really difficult sometimes, but
Yeah, but I think that's also like what she said, like a use by date for circus artists. And I'm sure in the circus world, there's a lot of performers who you know, who can't, like, don't continue as they get older. But I think a lot of people who don't perform in the circus, they also think like, so many people when I turned 40 emailed me and were like, do you just feel weaker now? Like, I just want to, like, I'm turning 40 next year and I'm really worried. And I'm like, no, like, and so I think it's so important, like, just to show that like you can still be strong, you know, as you age, and you can still learn new things and get stronger in certain ways.
Yeah. And especially if you are really not skipping the foundational things.
Yeah.
Because I think it is then that, you know, it's like trying to dive straight into things, you know, as we get older, maybe our ligaments and tendons do bounce a bit less. So, you know, you don't want to scramble yourself straight to things that are going to put unnecessary strain without building the musculature around them. There's a thing that I've gotten into the habit of doing where when I'm going to start a new skill set, or like I especially used it before I made the perch pole act with Ruben, I go to see a physio at the very beginning to go, this is the world of movement that I'm going into. Here is what it looks like. What potential weakness, like where can you see a risk for me? And, you know, it's like even things like when I was doing the perch pole, and that he noticed that when I was showing him what it looked like, I was really cranking into the back of my neck to look to the top to balance it. And so he gave me a bunch of deep neck flexor strengthening exercises so that I could look up in a way that wasn't going to end up giving me neck pain, you know, like all of those little things that it's like prevention and like building all of the auxiliary strength rather than waiting till there's an injury and having to do all the rehab, which is way more boring.
Yeah. I mean, that's so smart, to do that. And, I mean, I guess specifically because what you do is like, oh, here's something that probably has maybe never been done before, and I'm going to create this thing. And so, yeah, there's not a playbook of how to train for this and how to prevent injury. So that's so smart. That's so cool. Yeah, I want to get into your training, but before then, I just want to talk a little bit more about your performance. And, you know, like, I think strength is still seen as kind of, you know, a masculine trait. But watching your videos and your pictures, like, you bring such a strong feminine presence to your shows and what you do. And I just wondered, like, I mean, I think that's so important to have that kind of representation of like, you can be feminine and you can be like crazy strong. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I first was making the Strong Lady act, I think also because I had internalized this thing that because I'm a bigger person, that wasn't pretty. And then I also had internalized this thing of like strength is a butch masculine thing, that when I very first started to make the Strong Lady act, I did have the plan to make it really butch. Like I was going to like be stompy and wear chunky boots and like have it be like she doesn't know how to be a lady, but like wear a pretty dress but be awkward about it. And I did that for like the first couple of little showings of the work in cabarets and things. And then wonderfully, when I was first making it, I went and did, there's a festival in France in a town called Avignon, which is kind of like France's version of Edinburgh. There's loads of indoor shows and there's loads of street shows. And I went there and did street shows just like without being booked to go there, just went and busked it. And I was able to do like 5 or 6 shows a day, and it was really good because of the kinds of feedback I got from audiences and from other artists. Everybody just kept pushing me back towards like that I naturally move with elegant, like I'm not a clunky mover, and then I was trying to play this kind of clunky moving, and then people were just like, it's funny, that's not right, it's not funny in a good way. And there's like, and with a month of like 5 or 6 shows a day, and the feedback of those audiences, and having to do the show in French, so I couldn't rely on language quite as much, by the end of that season I had found this kind of combination, and it had kind of opened something in my mind as well, where I was like, I don't have to choose between strong and lovely, or strong and graceful, or and that one doesn't belong to masculine and one doesn't belong to feminine. Men can move in very gentle, graceful, elegant ways and still be really masculine, and women can be strong and take up space and still be really feminine. And that there's for me, like, gender and sexuality and ways of being are all so much of a spectrum, and I think that was a part of really understanding that, of going like, I don't need to pin myself anywhere. And at the time that felt like quite a big revelation, and it felt like a big part of the work I was doing was trying to show that it's not a choice, that you can be both as feminine as you want and as strong as you want. And also I was trying not to make a show that was just for women, and so I was trying to also show in the male volunteers that I use, really highlight the gentleness of them. And so kind of going like, these men who are being so supportive and so gentle and so kind, and also the thing of being a woman who is very much a woman and still can take up public space, and not trying to take it up in a male way, like, or in a more masculine way. Like, I wasn't trying to be like the male solo acts who have their own typical ways of grabbing that space, but I was going like, how do I do it as me with my particular mix of gender? It's like going, how do I hold that? And that felt really important back then. But I feel like over the 15 years or whatever it is that I've been doing it, that society's shifted quite a lot. Like, I think that now, like, it strong is sexy. Like, there is a real thing of, women on magazine covers with great defined biceps. Like, I feel like that has shifted loads in the last while. And it's really nice that, like, little kids, I think it might have even been from when I was in Toronto, but like, I've had people write to me and say that for Halloween, they've had daughters who would only dress as princesses all of their Halloweens. And then after seeing my show, they wanted to dress as strong women, because they didn't see it. They could see that they could still wear a pretty dress, and they could still put makeup on and put flowers in their hair, and then they could be, so it was like, that was really nice of going, when you get little girls going, I can be as funcy and girly as I want and still be tough. Like, that's a nice little blend.
Yeah. It reminds me of when I used to coach like kids gymnastics, and it was this idea of showing, like, if you get really strong, you can do all these cool things as well. And so that was always one of my favorite things about teaching. But something I kind of, you mentioned it, how things have changed over that 15 years. Because when you were talking about it, being like, you can be feminine and strong, and I was like, it's so much more accepted these days than 15 years ago. Did you ever experience like backlash from that, or like resistance, or?
No, not really. I've been super lucky. I've been really, really supported like
Yeah.
like I've often, especially early in my work, I was very often the only solo female act.
Mhm.
In a, like all the other, there might be a couple of duos that had a woman in them, but that it was almost all me and the boys. And I've never experienced, like, other people that I know have really experienced sexism in our workplace of the street shows and in Circus, but I've been super lucky.
Yeah.
But I also think I've just been able to, I think because I am able, I really love advice, for example. So some other female performers have really struggled because guys will come and try and tell them how to draw a crowd better or how to do
Right.
whatever, and it really makes them angry. But for me, I any advice that comes in, I filter it through whether it's useful to me or not. But I feel like advice on some level always comes from people wanting to help you. And so those kinds of things have never riled me.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I've had things where I've shown up to do shows and had guys assume I wouldn't be able to hold the pitch, that I shouldn't take the good time slot because that would be, they could make more money in that time slot than I can. But then once I've done a show and have shown that I can hold the pitch, and it's like those kind of things. But I've also moved out of busking. Like every now and then I do a busking festival, just because the game of being able to draw a crowd and hold them and then invite them to support you at the end is a really fun game. But mostly now, because I've worked mostly in Europe and in the UK, I mainly work at festivals that are more arts festival style ones, where you're in the program and people are there waiting for you when you start the show. And so it's a much different game. And that game, you really don't experience the sexism in the same way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love what you said about taking on that feedback. I think it's so important if you want to get good at anything, right? Is like that ability to be able to like take on people's feedback, even when it's like, it sometimes hurts because you're like, oh, I thought that was really good. And someone's like, maybe you could try that. I think that
I asked for a little bit. I sent out just before I was going to put this show, when I was finishing off making the new outdoor show Strong Enough, I sent to a few key people, I sent a rehearsal video just to see what they thought. And the person whose feedback came back and was most annoying, because it wasn't like a specific, oh, you should change the timing on that thing. Like it was more of a big question of like, yeah, I don't really see where that thread goes, like, and I was like, oh, that's not helpful. But actually, as I kind of sifted through that, it led me to make some really fundamental changes to the show that made it infinitely better. And so it's like sometimes the really annoying feedback, if you don't just block it, if you just go like, what do I do with that? And you let it kind of ferment a little bit. It seems to me that often the most annoying feedback, there's a seed of something that is really correct. It's like if something comes in and you just like someone might give you a really big curveball feedback that just falls away because you're like, well, that doesn't feel true. But when someone gives you a big bit of feedback that feels on some level like you actually know it's true, then that's when. So I find like the annoying feedback is sometimes the most useful one.
Right, absolutely. My wife gives me that feedback all the time. She's a scientist, and it's like she approaches everything analytically, and so like she'll come to my workshops and she'll give me that annoying feedback, and I'm like, first of all, really annoyed, and then I'm like, okay, I can. Yeah, that helps. That really helps. So you mentioned your new show. I just want to like get into that a little bit more, like the outdoor show Strong Enough.
Yeah.
So what is that? And if people are like, we have people in the UK, so how can they kind of see it if
Nice. The tour dates are on my website. and it's going to a bunch of festivals. It doesn't have any more, I don't think, in June, but from July through till September, it's out lots. And then from August, it overlaps with the beginning of the Tour for Power, which is going to theatres around the UK through the autumn.
Fantastic.
And there, it's strongladyproductions.com is the website, but there's a tour list on it. And I also shout about it on Instagram when there's a new thing coming. And that's also just Strong Lady Productions. But it will be touring around. Like I've got, as long as we don't get locked down again, over the weekend, it was amazing being back with audiences, like a bunch of strangers connecting in a public place. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. And so hopefully we don't lock down again and we can have lots of more festivals and shows and things.
Yeah. And so what can people expect at that show?
So it's really, I developed like not a new style in the world, but like a new style for me that is really a real blend of circus and storytelling. So I took, there's a little bit of autobiographical storytelling in the outdoor show, but much more in the indoor show. But it's a bit about me, but then also stories from loads of people who I've interviewed about times when they were strong. And then I kind of took each story and then tried not to have any kind of commitment to these are the skills I want to put in the show, which is how I've always created in the past. Is like, here's the skills, how do I frame them? This one, it was really like, here are the stories, what skill will illustrate that the best? And I'm trying to use the skills to really put subtext in, like to really show either the feeling of what the person is doing, or like it's about the effort and the struggle and the tension in the stories. Because I feel like when we talk about experiences of being strong, we often go, oh, this terrible thing happened and here's how it ended. and then or this challenge arrived and here's how I solved it. And we miss the middle where there is struggle, but because we think that the struggle is where we were weak, but actually the strength in the story isn't at the end, it's in that struggling bit. The end is just the result of the strength, it's like in the struggle is where we use and build and find. I think of it like, you have to tear muscle a little bit to build more muscle. It's like that struggle is the bit where we're tearing it and building a bit more. And so I'm really trying to use the circus to highlight that the strength wasn't the end, that the strength was that bit. So like, for example, there's a guy who told me about he was at university when his mum got pregnant with his little brother, and she was a single mum. So he moved home to help raise his little brother. And at some point in him growing up, he started presenting with all these symptoms, like he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't walk. And then I think he was about 12 maybe when that all started presenting. Anyway, then he had the experience of really trying to solve what was going on and trying to fix it. And then eventually he had a diagnosis of a particular kind of autism. The acronym is PDA, pathological demand avoidance. And it's like really high anxiety levels, and he's just trying to get control. So he does all these things where he refuses to do things because that's something he can control. And so in telling that story, what I discovered was that if I've got a big scaff plank, a big wooden plank, that I'm doing a balancing act with that plank of like balancing on my hand and popping it on to balance on my arm and jumping it from hand to hand, things like that, to kind of show his attempt to control this thing that is slightly out of control the whole time. Mm-hmm. And then also put in some kind of like lifts with the plank to when he's talking about that he was a typical man and trying to fix things, but that he realized that the strength is in being able to just be there and support somebody without trying to fix them. And so at that point I kind of put the plank down. And so things like that, where the the skill isn't there to show off the skill, but the skill reveals something about the story. Yeah. And so in it, there's like, I also learned a whole new vocabulary for me of kind of movement flow that is a bit more like, it's kind of like a marriage of soft acrobatics with dance, with strength, like with body weight strength training movements. And that whole style of movement, because there's so much effort in it.
Yeah.
And because also you can see the struggle in me trying to do those things. Like I don't perform them in a way that is just like they're just flowing and easy. I let the struggle of it be visible. The same with, there's a handstand act in it that is really about showing imperfection in it. Like I'm doing my best to do great handstand shapes, but they are not perfect, and they don't, and there's things in that I fall out of, like I don't nail everything, and it's that kind of letting all of that imperfection be visible as well.
Yeah. I think that is so powerful, and it's one thing I love about our handstand community is we get to see that struggle with people, right? Like people start and they're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. I'm too scared to do that. And then it's like everyone's, they share their struggle, and then they get there. And I think it's also, one thing I try to show on like my social media is not just like, oh, here's me nailing a skill that I've spent 4 years working on. It's like, here's me failing lots and lots of times at that skill. I think it's so powerful to show that. I want to get a little into your process of putting the act together. Like you kind of talked a little bit about that, but like I saw some really cool stuff on your Instagram, and it just really kind of, like it made me smile because it seems very like kind of my kind of geeky personality of I love flowcharts and diagrams and all this stuff. And you had like, when you were putting the show together, you had like little stick figures and storyboards, and like, is that always been part of your process, or is that part of this new process because now it's a story?
Yeah, it's an evolution from the old way that I've worked, but I was really lucky, and I've always kind of worked in a kind of a storyboarding stick figures kind of a way.
Yeah.
And I am quite into, I love a spreadsheet and I love a flow chart, and like those things. But when I first started trying to make this new style of work, I was really lucky, and I had some funding in the UK that is called Developing Your Creative Practice funding. And it is literally some money to do whatever you need to do to go from where you are now as an artist to where you want to be as an artist. And that it was amazing. And so using that, I used that for the kind of research and development time for the shows, but also to really kind of push into what creative process is and how I could expand my process better for storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so I got to work with mentors from Complicity and Spy Monkey and Occam's Razor, and the guy who's the object animation specialist from Warhorse, and all these incredible people. And they partly helped me kind of investigate what the show would be, but they also mentored me on how their creative process works, so that I could kind of glean which bits work for me. And one of the things that I took out of that time was this, and because I work in a room on my own most of the time, and one of the things I found really helpful was to just, at the beginning of the process or at the beginning of the day, to kind of put on a separate bit of paper all the things that I'd like to explore. So sometimes it might be like a particular story, or it might be a scene, or it might be an image that I've had an idea for, or whatever the things are, and then have them all there. And so that when I'm planning my day, I can choose what thing I'm working on now. Or, like I can kind of go, okay, these things will fit into, I'm going to aim to get all these things done today, or or often I find I just go one at a time so that I can see where my energy's at. But I can take one, and sometimes I'll take 3 because they all kind of tie in together. But I take that and just go for this length of time. So I'll set a timer, go for this length of time. This is what I'm working on.
Right.
And because if you try and go into a room on your own and go, right, I'm going to make a show, it's like, it's too big of a thing. Or even like, I'm going to make this scene can often be too big of a thing. But when you break it down to, I'm going to might have go, I'm going to, for 2 hours, I'm going to explore this story and all the objects, like these objects that I might try, or these skills that I might try layering onto that story and see how they fit. And, it's like really specific and for a set time. Because if I don't do that, then I will jump from one thing to another thing to another thing, and I'll get into being overwhelmed, or I will just get distracted by doing emails or whatever else. And because sometimes you can also think you can fit way more into a day than is actually possible. And then you end up getting to the end of the day and feeling like you failed or you didn't get through, whereas if I set time slots for things, then as long as I did those time slots, I did the day right. I can go like, yes, tick, I did it. Even though I didn't finish the show that day, I finished that day, and I only put in to the schedule the things that could fit. Right. I only had 2 hours left in the space, so I did 2 1-hour chunks, and it's like and I discovered that I have a tendency not to allow any time for breaks, which is really important. So then, slowly over time, I started scheduling breaks in, and even like when you're in a time chunk that is for something. Especially when it was really like, if it was a chunk that was like really working on a skill, then I would say I had said an hour for working on, just for training these particular skills so that they could go into an act. As long as I don't do anything else in that hour, then it doesn't matter how far I get on that thing in that hour. So it's like, if I'm, I might be drilling handstands, but then if I just need to sit down and stretch for 20 minutes of that hour, then I still did it because I didn't wander off and do emails, it's like that thing of being able to ride your energy and respond to what you're discovering, but just going, that little bit of time is sacred for that thing.
Yeah, I really love that. And I've heard a lot of like creative people, like writers, have kind of a similar process. Like I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman, and I know he has a similar thing where it's like he sets a like time and he's like, I can sit there and do nothing, or I can write, but I can't go and do emails, or I can't go and like do something else. And I've never really thought about it like that with training. It's like, if your hands, like my handstands are going badly, I'll just be like, I'll either try and stick it out, or I'll be like, I'll go do something else. But I like that idea of just being like, okay, I can stretch for 10 minutes and then maybe I'll get something. I'm going to try that. That's a great tip. So I want to move into your training a little bit. And how does your training look? Because like, there must be a lot of like foundation strength that you work on. And so do you do like, is it like a traditional gym workout, or are you like, lifting guys on a swing, or like?
It depending on what shows I'm doing, the training shifts, and also over time, my interest kind of moves around. And so there have been times where I've had really like typical strength gym workout mentality, going and chasing numbers of reps and sets and weights, and also like going to see a physio, because my times where I do weights at the gym, that happens in bursts, and it's not something that I do constantly. So when I haven't been doing it for ages and I'm about to go back in, like I'm like, actually I want to get back into lifting in the gym for a bit, then I have found a great personal trainer, but then I've been in other places, I've found other ones, but I get a personal trainer for a few sessions to just make sure that I'm starting at the weights that are the right weights for where I'm at now, that my technique is good, to kind of give me ideas of, like what mix of lifting I should be doing to support the main kinds of lifting that I want to do. That all of that stuff, like I feel like getting an expert outside eye to help me craft what I'm aiming at, and just to make sure that that I haven't, in the gap between the last time I did it, that I haven't stopped activating my glutes in the right way, so that like just to make sure that I'm keeping my body safe and that I'm making the most out of the time that I have to train. And then so sometimes I do that. I haven't lifted a weight since COVID started. So I haven't been into a gym, and even though gyms have opened up again here, I haven't gone back yet. I will also have times where I go really far more into a yoga practice, like quite a core strength focused yoga practice, and that also I'm not really doing much of at the moment, but there have been a lot of times where that's the main way that I keep my strength. Just that, and also like a bit, I do some animal flow style training. Like body weight training at the moment is the main way that I train.
Right.
Because I'm not doing the shows where I'm lifting people, but also when I am doing shows where I'm lifting, like when I'm doing part and acrobatics shows, I just want to train with that person and train that skill. And then we will have drills that we use each other's body weight to train rather than using weights and things like that. But yeah, right now, because the kind of stuff that I'm doing has this more soft acrobatics, body weight, skill kind of stuff to it, dance style things, it's kind of like a little bit of yoga, a little bit of this more like primal movement style training, lots of drills for handstands, lots of doing core exercises. Like there's some friends who are circus artists, and I, through the whole of the first lockdown and then the second lockdown here, and really like on and off right up until about a month ago, we would get together on Zoom just to do core workouts together, just to kind of keep each other motivated. And I've never really just done sets of sit-ups and squats and this and that, like all of this. And it was really fun. Like V-sits is a thing I'd never done, just because I'd never really done them. And then it was like that was in the routine of what we were doing. So now I'm like, oh, they're quite fun once you get into it. And I thought about buying weights to have at home, but I've also got, like, in the current show, I'm doing lots of lifting bricks and balancing heavy planks and doing all these things. So I was just like, well, I'll just train those skills, and then I'm still getting a little bit of, like, I use TheraBands and like stretchy bands to do things. But and then I noticed over the weekend when I was just doing lots of runs of the show that I'm very right arm heavy in a lot of the lifts with the bricks and things that I'm doing in the show. And so then I realized that I need to actually start putting into my training things to balance it out, so that I can, in the choreography, it doesn't matter if it's not balanced, but then going like, oh, actually now I need to look at my training and make sure that I'm not going to end up with some big imbalance that's going to then lead to an injury.
That's a really good point. Like, I kind of have a similar thing, because I have an elbow injury on my right arm, I only train one arm handstands on my left arm, which everyone is like, you should always train both sides. But it's like, I can't, because this arm won't do it. But I always make sure every one arm handstand I do on this side, it's like I'm doing something, straight arm pushing on this side, just to try and not get too imbalanced. So it's really cool that you're able to do that. So for your soft acrobatics and animal flow and that kind of training. Do you have a coach for that, or do you?
Yeah, I don't have a coach specifically, but I've been really lucky to have had bits of coaching with a few different people. And
Mhm.
one of the brilliant things to come out of this whole COVID palaver is how much we've realized that we don't have to be in the same spaces as people to work
Yeah.
together. So like creatively, I've collaborated with people purely over Zoom and not even been in a room with them. And also coaching wise, I've been able to work with people over Zoom and not in the same room, which opened up the realm of who it was possible to work with.
Yeah.
So before COVID, I had done some really amazing sessions with a guy called Farid Herrera.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant movement coach, and he really opened up a whole load of possibilities for me. Just with, again, he's really good at taking it back to really foundational movement patterns and looking at, building a pathway in a really progressive way, so that you're not just diving straight into a complex movement, but you're breaking it down until something feels natural, and then moving along. And also I worked with two choreographers, just a tiny bit each, Gabby Cook and Ariel Lausen. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right. Ariel's actually Canadian. She trained in Montreal and and I think she's worked with quite a few of the Canadian companies, but she's in London at the moment. So I did a little bit of in-person stuff with her. And Gabby Cook is also an exceptional dancer and acrobat. And both of them kind of helped me look at how to pull those kind of movements into a choreographic flow.
Yeah.
And then most recently, I worked over Zoom with Connor Wild, he also worked quite a lot in Canada, but he now lives in Tasmania, and so there's no way I could have worked with him.
Yeah.
But we did sessions over Zoom, and his style is really similar to Farid, but
Right.
he's actually a circus artist, so he had more of a focus on creating choreographies out of the movements.
Mm-hmm.
But he also was really great at nerding out on how to break down a movement and figuring out, because I was really clear with all of them that what I wasn't asking them for was help to create a body that could do these things. But I was like, what I want to do is find what propensity my body as it is has that I'm not aware of. So like getting them to help me unpack movements, and maybe, like things like I was like, oh, I'd love to be able to do a macaco, but
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of spring, and it's something that I'm still doing drills towards. But rather than go, okay, I need to change my body so it can do those things, I was like, well, what gives the same feeling as that movement that is in the realm of what's possible for my body if I just break down the movements? So that what I was trying to learn was movement pathways rather than trying to transform my body to fit a specific technique,
Yeah.
And they were, and so Farid and Connor are the ones who really worked with me in a coaching kind of way, and both of them were really good at responding to that and helping me to kind of find ways into movements that work with my current strengths rather than trying to be a different kind of body. And I think that has taken me, and I'm 42, and it has taken me till only a couple of years ago before I could really approach a load of these new physicalities from a place where I didn't come to it with shame about not having the right body, but being able to go like, okay, I have a body that has some really interesting strengths and some really interesting limitations. So what can I do with this body? And trying to create stuff that fits my natural inclinations so that people can watch it and feel like they're watching my body, not watching me try and be somebody else's body.
Yeah. That is it's such a big theme that we have in our handstand coaching groups. It's like this idea of we're going to find the best handstand for you, for your body, because everyone's going to be different, whether it's, you know, how tall you are, or what your mobility is, or, you know, how strong you are, all these things. It's like, yeah, I love that so much. And I actually met Farid, is that how you say his name? Yeah, I met him when I was teaching in London, and I was so sick. I had like been talking at all these different workshops and I couldn't speak. And it was just like, so I really want to go back and actually have a proper like hangout play session with him, because he's such an amazing guy.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to finish up with a couple of questions. Firstly, like you do a lot of, as well as you're performing, you do a lot of kind of speaking and public speaking. And one of the things you talk about a lot is like mindset. And so something that a lot of our students kind of struggle with is, you know, the fear. And whether that's just the fear of going upside down, the fear of moving away from the wall is a big one for a lot of people. And so how do you, like, from a mindset perspective, how do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for me is this idea of growth mindset, where it's like when we have like a fixed mindset being like, I am this person and these are the things I'm good at and these are the things that I'm bad at. And, you know, and then a growth mindset being, I am a person who is evolving and learning and growing, so that when you fail something, like you come away from the wall and you stack it and it hurts and it's embarrassing. But then instead of going, that's proof that I am not ready to come away from the wall, that's proof that I'm bad at handstands, or that's proof that I'm not strong enough, or whatever it is. If you then mine that experience for what can I learn, like, why did that fall? What can I learn from it? What weakness did it reveal to me that I need to strengthen before I do that again? And so then it takes away the thing where we hit stuff and go like, oh, that's a wall. And we kind of go, you hit something and go, oh, that's a ladder. Okay, what's the next? Like, what can I learn from that thing, and how can I grow from it? And then I, you know, like, and also in life that can be a thing of like, you know, like the thing where you behave really badly and you are a bit ashamed of how you behaved in a situation, and then you can look at it and be like, well, what can I learn from that? Well, that's revealed to me that I really value kindness, so I don't actually want to be someone that snaps at people like that. So I'm going to spend some time working on that. You know, it's like those things of not just, so that's one thing. And then a really related idea is something that really clarified for me in the research I was doing for the new show, is this idea of reframing challenges or reframing difficult experiences as challenges that you have the opportunity to learn from and grow from and to develop through, as opposed to seeing difficult things as threats that you have to protect yourself from in the future. So that when we encounter difficult emotions or difficult things, like things that are hard to do, or any of the kind of experiences that usually would make us react in a like fight or flight kind of way, if we can reframe past experiences where we were in difficult times and look at them and go like, well, what was the challenge and how did I overcome it, or how did I learn from it, or how has it shaped who I am today? And we can retell those stories for ourselves, then we become better at looking at future things from the place of going, oh, I'm strong enough to face that challenge, rather than having all of the barricades come up of like, I have to make sure that never happens again. You know, it's like those two things I think are really mindset things that I find really helpful.
Yeah, I when you were talking about that second one of like looking at past experiences and saying like, how did I approach that I can use right now? I think for me, growing up doing gymnastics, we were so often like given these physical things where it's like, I can't do that yet. and it kind of seems impossible, but then you do the step by step and eventually you get there. And so it's kind of given me this confidence, like physically, that if I see a movement, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I know that if I take steps, I can get there. And I think a lot of people, don't necessarily have that experience of gymnastics. But now when you're talking about it, I'm like, oh, I can apply that to the rest of my life. I've just never thought about it. So that's really amazing. Well, yeah, we could talk for hours. I could ask you questions for hours, but yeah, I think we can wrap it up there. But thank you so much. I just want to say, do you have anything else you want to share before we finish up?
I think that handstand practice for me, I think, is a really, like, it's almost like the perfect way to practice those mindsets for real life. Like, I find, like, when I started really trying to train handstands, I felt like it was almost like a spiritual practice. It's just like, because it is that chance in a really low stakes way to really try your hardest and fail again and again and again, and go incrementally, go like, why did that fail? And not get, and like to train myself out of the habit of failing and going, yep, that's proof I'm terrible. And because that was where I started out with it. I was going, yep, I don't have the right body for this. It's like going, that it's a really good training place if you're really deliberate about it, to go like, and if you know that it's useful for the rest of life, to just be like, okay, I'm going to try my hardest and I'm definitely going to fall. Yeah. And then every time I fall, I can mine that experience for what am I going to do next? And that practice, I think, can shape everything.
Yeah. I'm smiling because when you say that, like, that's proof. I'm just like, yep, that's what I do. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's such a wonderful point to end on. So thank you so much, Charmaine.
No worries. Thank you heaps for having me on. It's lovely.